All right, picture this. You're leading a country that is literally tearing itself apart at the seams. States are actively packing up and leaving the nation. Families are violently turning against one another. You're getting absolutely hammered by the press every single day from all sides. And on top of all that, millions of human beings are still trapped in the brutal, horrific reality of slavery. Now imagine you're the one person expected to somehow fix all of this. Welcome to this explainer on Abraham Lincoln and the abolition of slavery. Today we're going to dig into the incredibly tough decisions, the fierce controversies, and the pivotal moments that changed American history forever.
That overwhelming scenario we just talked about? That was the exact day-to-day reality facing Abraham Lincoln. But here's the thing. Was Lincoln actually driven by morality, politics, or just pure survival? You see, Lincoln didn't walk into the presidency as the great emancipator that so many people picture today. Actually, his views on slavery evolved quite a bit over time. And his path to abolition was way more complicated, heavily political, and honestly, a lot riskier than the history books tend to make it seem. So how exactly did a self-taught lawyer from a log cabin end up being the president who helped tear down slavery in America?
States leaving, families divided, millions enslaved. Talk about impossible high-stakes pressure, right? Lincoln was stepping into a crisis unlike anything the country had ever seen. He had to act as this ultimate master strategist. He was constantly trying to balance the profound moral outrage of slavery with the very real, terrifying threat that the United States of America was quite literally going to cease to exist. Every single move you made was scrutinized under a microscope.
Section 1. A nation deeply divided.
Okay, so the nation at this point was completely defined by a stark economic and ideological split. On one hand, you have the Southern economy. It was completely 100% reliant on enslaved labor, with millions of African Americans forced to work on sprawling plantations just to fuel this massive cotton industry. But then, on the other side, you've got the Northern states. Generally speaking, yes, they opposed slavery. But, and this is a crucial bit of historical nuance, not everyone in the North actually believed in full racial equality. And this wasn't just some polite political disagreement over tea. Every single time a new territory wanted to join the United States, a massive, explosive question came up. Would this new territory allow slavery or not? People were absolutely furious. Violence broke out constantly. Entire communities were clashing over this divide.
And right into the middle of this powder keg steps Abraham Lincoln. He was this incredibly sharp, self-taught communicator who just had a total gift for explaining things so that everyday people could understand him. Personally, Lincoln believed slavery was morally wrong. He believed it was built entirely on a foundation of injustice. But his early political stance was actually focused on stopping the expansion of slavery into new territories, rather than demanding immediate nationwide abolition where it already existed. Why take that cautious stance? Well, because the nation was just so incredibly fragile. He, along with a lot of other leaders, deeply feared that pushing too hard and too fast on abolition would just instantly destroy the Union completely.
Section 2. Preserving the Union first.
So this deep division quickly escalates into total chaos. In 1860, Lincoln gets elected as the candidate for the Republican Party, a party that directly opposes the expansion of slavery. Southern states see this victory as a direct, existential threat to their entire way of life. Almost immediately in early 1861, before Lincoln even officially takes office, several Southern states announce they're out. They leave the Union and form their own government, the Confederacy. Fast forward just a few months to April 1861, Confederate forces attack Fort Sumter in South Carolina, and boom, just like that, the Civil War has begun.
Now this brings us to a reality that can be pretty jarring to hear today. Lincoln famously said, "If I could save the Union without freeing any enslaved people, I would do it." At the very start of the Civil War, Lincoln publicly insisted that the war was primarily about saving the Union, not abolishing slavery. Now he did follow that up by saying if he could save the Union by freeing all enslaved people, he'd do that too. But you have to understand, he was desperately trying to hold a fractured nation together. He knew that certain slave states had actually remained loyal to the Union, and he was terrified, literally terrified, that pushing for abolition too early would drive those loyal states straight into the arms of the Confederacy.
Section 3. The Emancipation Turning Point.
As the war dragged on, the shifting realities on the ground led to a huge strategic realization. Ending slavery weakens the Confederacy and strengthens the Union. You see, enslaved people weren't just waiting around for things to happen. They were actively escaping plantations, fleeing toward Union lines, and many were demanding to fight for their freedom. At the same time, the Confederate war machine was heavily dependent on that enslaved labor to keep running.
Add in the mounting pressure from brilliant abolitionists like Frederick Douglass, who were forcefully demanding the war become a fight for human freedom, and Lincoln finally had a breakthrough. His deeply held moral beliefs were finally perfectly aligning with his strategic and military needs.
And that brings us to the Emancipation Proclamation. But we really need to bust a major misconception here. This document, which officially took effect on January 1, 1863, did not instantly free every single enslaved person in America. It primarily applied only to rebelling areas, places where Lincoln honestly had very little direct control at the time. But strategically, oh man, it was a total earthquake. It completely transformed the entire meaning of the war. It wasn't just about preserving the Union anymore. It was now officially a crusade to end slavery. This brilliantly discouraged countries like Britain and France from supporting the Confederacy because backing a slave-owning rebellion had just become politically toxic. Plus, it officially allowed African-American men to enlist in the Union Army.
Which leads us to the sheer scale of that decision. 200,000. Nearly 200,000 black soldiers and sailors would eventually serve in the Union forces. Just think about the profound weight of that for a second. Men who had been systematically denied their basic human freedom were now officially taking up arms to save the nation and utterly destroy the institution of slavery. In fact, many historians believe their incredible contributions were the absolute critical factor that finally tipped the scales toward a Union victory.
Section 4. The Constitutional Finality.
But Lincoln knew a wartime proclamation wasn't going to be enough long-term. Securing permanent change required a monumental legal battle. Step 1 was proposing a permanent constitutional change. Lincoln knew a future president or court could just reverse his wartime order, so he needed the 13th Amendment. Step 2, that was an absolute bloodbath of a political fight. Congress was incredibly divided. Lincoln and his allies had to relentlessly negotiate, persuade, and honestly heavily pressure politicians, agonizingly building support vote by vote. Finally, Step 3, passing the 13th Amendment in January 1865. When it passed the House of Representatives, crowds literally erupted in joyous celebration. It was ratified later that year, and slavery in the United States was legally, permanently abolished.
Section 5. Lincoln's Enduring Legacy. Tragically, just days after the Civil War effectively ended, Lincoln was at Ford's Theater in Washington, D.C., where he was assassinated by John Wilkes Booth, a Confederate sympathizer. The country was completely devastated, mourning the man who had carried the weight of America's darkest chapter on his shoulders. And today, the debate about his legacy continues. On one side, you have the view of Lincoln as the heroic liberator, the guy who ended slavery and forever changed history. On the flip side, some view him as the cautious politician, someone who moved way too slowly and acted more out of political necessity than pure morality. But as we've seen in this explainer, both perspectives actually hold water. History is rarely just black and white. Lincoln was a pragmatic politician, a brilliant wartime strategist, and a man whose personal beliefs truly did evolve while he was in office.
The big takeaway from all of this is that great change often happens slowly, painfully, and let's face it, imperfectly. This isn't just some dusty story from the past. It's a masterclass in leadership under unimaginable pressure. It shows us the gritty, frustrating reality of political compromise, the absolute necessity of moral courage, and the incredibly long, difficult struggle for human freedom. Without Lincoln's heavily calculated and, yes, sometimes very cautious decisions, the abolition of slavery might have taken a radically different and maybe even much longer path.
So, as we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with the exact question we started with. Was Abraham Lincoln primarily motivated by morality, politics, or preserving the Union? Think about that chaotic timeline we just walked through, the intense pressures, the shifting strategies, and those massive constitutional battles. How do you weigh his political caution against his final, historic achievements? I invite you to reflect on the evidence we've covered, dig a little deeper into the sources yourself, and keep this fascinating discussion going. Keep questioning history, and I'll catch you in the next explainer.